All in Sports Network. We love sports.
It is Saturday, September 2nd, and this is your daily fix for all things Texas Longhorns. Texas is on a bye week this week, so this is our immediate reaction to Week 10 games. We're recording this and giving this to you live right before the afternoon, evening games get underway, and so we've got the first slate of games just about wrapped up by now, but this is going to be our Week 10 reaction, and then going in and talking about the games coming up later on this evening. Jake and myself, we have other things going on tonight, so we couldn't just wait all day long and wait till all the games are wrapped up to give you the full reaction. But obviously, stay tuned. Tuesday through Friday, we will have a kind of closing of Week 10. But yeah, Texas is on a bye week. A lot of hate watching this week in terms of teams we want to see lose. We've got a whole slate of games of teams that we are rooting to win, and not all panning out here early in the first window of games. But Jake, early, Week 10 thoughts so far.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, it's kind of just been chalk so far. There hasn't been really any upsets. We saw some games get close. Miami was kind of getting scared for a little while, as they always do, because their defense is just non-existent. But we kind of expected Ohio State to win. They were able to win a very ugly, kind of pathetic game by Penn State. They had the ball inside the 3-yard line 2 times and couldn't score. And Vanderbilt Auburn, which was a game I was kind of excited to watch some of, has kind of been a snooze fest of a game. I think it's 10-7 Vanderbilt late in the fourth quarter. So kind of a little bit of a disappointing early slate of games. I think that there was a little bit of excitement for a short bit, but all the favorites were kind of pulling away. And honestly, that Penn State Ohio State game to me just wasn't a very, very fun football game to watch. And it should have been a game that should have been tonight as well.
Right. A couple things about the Ohio State-Penn State game is that it should have been a night game, should have been the whiteout game for Penn State. There should have been way more hype going into it than what there was. And really, my idea of going into this game already was I was already thinking that this was going to be a typical Penn State losing to Ohio State. They'll keep it somewhat competitive in the first couple of quarters, and then Ohio State will kind of break it out. And Ohio State never really broke it out, but really in the second half of that game, Ohio State controlled Penn State and really had, in my opinion, Penn State really had no shot at winning that game, regardless of what the score and the box score had said, and then having opportunity after opportunity. It's the same old, Jake. We were talking about it very briefly before we got on air, and then we wanted to kind of save it for the conversation to have on air. Is this Penn State team is the same team that Penn State has been for the last nearly decade under James Franklin. And that was kind of what I was alluding to on Friday's episode in our prediction picks. But you've got a same quarterback who has, decent hype of being a big arm, big play guy. And yet during the big games, they turtle and no big plays are had. There's no big passing options. You get an okay to decent defense, but not a defense that is elite enough to carry you into a playoff or into a Big Ten championship game. You've got an okay running game. You've got decent talent across the offensive line, but again, nothing that's going to compare against the top teams in the conference or even in the nation to make a legitimate threat of a deep run to a national championship. It's the same old, for Penn State. It's the same offense that we've seen time and time again, where they look pretty formidable against weaker opponents. And then whenever it comes to playing the Ohio States, the Michigans, even Iowa on a good year, or Michigan State on a good year, they fall short and they fall flat, and they can't get over 20 points in a big game. And so I think that's kind of been my feel for Penn State. I think that's the nationwide opinion of Penn State, and I know Penn State fans are getting tired of watching the same team over and over and over again.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's not even a James Franklin thing. They are not as talented as Ohio State. They do not have the same talent. They do not have the same talent as a Michigan, as an Oregon. They never have. If you just look at recruiting rankings, you look at the composite talent rankings on the team, they kind of always end right where they're supposed to in the Big Ten, which is the top
Third,
of that
fourth,
tier
fifth.
2, the top of that tier 2 section in the Big Ten, but never in the tier 1, and they can't beat the tier 1 teams. And what's wild about this game is it started out 10-0 Penn State, and you're like, well, maybe, but that was a pick six. Their offense failed to score a touchdown. They had an interception right before the half from inside the 3-yard line, and then they failed to be able to score on some of the most bizarre play calling I've seen, with just they just kind of ran it up the middle. Also, Aller could have kept it on every single one of those 3 runs and walked in for a touchdown. And then they did the most obvious design of a passing play on the 4th down, where they just send their fullback, the only guy who really had any explosive plays for them, out to the flat, tried to run a pick. It wasn't very well run, and every single person was double covered. Penn State needs a playmaker at quarterback. They keep having these big, tall, slow pocket passers that they talk about being an NFL talent. They never end up going to the NFL, and if they do, they don't do anything. And in college, for a team that's like Penn State, where you don't just have an offensive line that's just going to absolutely wreck it. I mean, they averaged less than 4 yards per carry today. And so the only way to beat Ohio State when you're less talented is to have a playmaker at quarterback. And they have not had that anytime recently. They've always had guys that are hyped up to be that guy, but they never are. You're not that guy, pal. Like that's what I'll say about Penn State quarterbacks.
Yeah, and that's what it feels like every single year, Jake. Miami, Duke, it was a competitive game. One thing that I want to talk about Miami real quick is, do they have the worst fan base for a branded program like Miami, of the U and how big the U is? How bad of a fan base do you have to have a basically empty stadium when you're the number 5 team, you're undefeated, and you have a Heisman, favorite as your quarterback, and one of the most explosive offenses in the entire country, and you can't even sell out the Orange Bowl or whatever they call it these days.
And I know, it is an NFL. It's not an on-campus state, but it doesn't matter. When you're the number 5 team, that stadium's not that big. It should be full. It should be loud. There's like 10 students there. It's a joke. It's the most overrated brand in college football. People always talk about the U and this and that in Miami. People outside of the program care about Miami more than actual Miami cares about their program. I mean, Michael Irvin's their only fan. It's just, it doesn't.
He's their mascot on the sideline.
I'm over Miami. If you're a recruit, why in the world would you want to go there and play in front of 20? But you can get money at any other program. I just don't understand the draw. I mean, if you're Mario Cristobal, like, why would you leave Oregon to go to Miami? I mean, maybe state income taxes and living in Florida and all that. But as far as like just for the program, from program to program switch, coaching in front of that crowd for Oregon, I'll take that over coaching in front of a handful of people in an empty stadium when you're number 5 in the nation and undefeated. I had texted you that during the game. I was like, Miami's the most overrated brand because they get talked about as a top brand up there with, Texas and Oklahoma and Alabama and Georgia as far as brand recognition goes. And they're not even close. They're not even in the second tier to me. I mean, you look at almost every school in the Big Ten, the SEC, even in the Big 12. I mean, UCF gets a bigger draw of crowds than they do in their home state. They might be 4th in their home state as far as actual fandom goes.
I mean, they have one of the most explosive offenses with a Heisman caliber quarterback leading the way, and they're undefeated at number 5 in the country, and they can't sell out their stadium. I mean, I'm looking at their game right now, and yes, currently with 2 minutes left in the 4th quarter, it's 53-31. This game, Duke was leading. I believe it was 24-31 at one point in the second half, and Miami has just absolutely exploded with points and big plays after big play, and they've gotten to a very comfortable lead now. And dude, there's no one in the stands. Can you imagine if Texas was playing a rank, or not even a ranked team, but a team within the conference that had 2 losses in week 10? It would be sold out. It's sold out even whenever they play UL Monroe. and they stayed the entire game into the fourth quarter of a blowout against, a non-conference, lower tier team in the college football ranks. So it just blows my mind that people can even give Miami that type of recognition of being one of the top programs in the country. But anyway, Duke nearly held on. It got away from them there at the end of the game. It was a good game going back and forth for a little while. Just defense was getting exposed, and Malik Murphy was throwing interceptions, bad throws, bad decisions on third down, and really cost the offense opportunities to get down the field and score.
Yeah, I mean, Malik Murphy just kind of looks like what he was at Texas, and he's a great kid. He has a ton of arm talent, but there's times where he just does not see defenders, and it happens too often. It happens to every quarterback. You see it in the NFL. You see guys just not see a linebacker on a play and throw it straight to him. It happens. The problem is in the big games, in the big. In times where you can't afford it, his interceptions always seem to come at the worst time or to let a team back in it, which is what happened in that K-State game last year, and even in the BYU game, to a point where you just throw picks where it's a time where you just cannot throw an interception. And that's going to be something that, hopefully he can continue to develop. He has had a good season at Duke. Duke is a pretty decent football team this year, better than expected, but you see why he's not at Texas anymore. And I don't want to say that in an insulting way, because I love Malik Murphy, but you see why he realized he wasn't going to be a full-time starter at Texas in his career if he stayed, and that's why he went to Duke.
Even if he stayed and he was there long enough to surpass Arch Manning's tenure, he probably wouldn't have played over, a Trey Owens or one of the recruits coming in for Texas as well. So a good decision for him to move on. I think they've actually done a better job this year with Malik Murphy as at quarterback for Duke than what they would have done otherwise. So, props to him. They're still building that program with Manny Diaz. Jake, Ole Miss's offense, they actually showed up for the first time this season and really played the way they were supposed to play in conference against Arkansas on the road. And a 63-31 victory for Ole Miss. Now Ole Miss was up, I believe it was 35-10 at halftime. So continued putting on the points in the second half. Arkansas got the majority of their points coming in the second half. They got 21 of their 31 in the second half. But just a complete beatdown. Ole Miss finally showed up and I think showed their full potential. Now, is this Ole Miss showing their full potential, Jake? Or is this Arkansas just that grind in the middle of the season are just like, all right, we're losing games. We're not building any type of momentum. Maybe that confidence level for Arkansas just isn't quite there, and they're starting to call it quits on the season a little bit.
Why not both? That's my question. I mean, I don't want to accuse Arkansas of giving up just yet. They are 3-2 in conference play, 5-3 on the season. Their season is not over. They can still probably go to a decent bowl game, which is honestly more than most people were expecting from Arkansas. And I'm sure they're still going to play some games close. Texas goes there in a few weeks. I'm still not feeling that Texas is going to go in there and just do what Ole Miss did today. But I think Ole Miss definitely played to their potential today. They are an absolutely loaded team. And I mean, you look at Jackson Dart today. I don't know if you've seen this stat line. This is ridiculous. 25 of 31, 515 yards, 6 touchdowns, no interceptions.
Wow.
And then how about Jordan Watkins at receiver? Eight catches, 254 yards, 5 touchdowns. That is averaging 31.8 yards per catch.
Yeah, that's insane.
Not bad. That is
not bad at all.
Video game numbers from Ole Miss.
On freshman mode, because you can't do that on Heisman these days. Ole Miss has showed up, and you know what, Jake? You're looking at Ole Miss right now, and they've got 2 losses on the regular season, 2 losses in conference play. Let me try to find do you have their full schedule brought up real quick?
If they win out, they'll make the playoff, because that means they beat Georgia next week at home.
Okay.
And then they play at Florida. And winning at Florida with a Florida team that has been looking competent as of late. The committee will not view that as a bad win, quote unquote. And then they finish it with Mississippi State, which is a rivalry game at home. So if they win out, they won't make the SEC title game, but they will make the playoff, I think.
Yeah, and a very good chance to be, a 10 seed and 11 seed, one of the lower seeded playoff teams. So Ole Miss, here's the thing about the 12-team playoff, and we've talked about it in nauseum. But here's the thing about the 12-team playoffs: you can have 2 losses, but if you gather in a couple of good wins, like against a Georgia or something along those lines, within your schedule, and your schedule is tough, and you're in a tough conference like the SEC, and you're an Ole Miss team that had preseason potential, what's keeping the committee from saying, man, they could be that top 12 team? They could be one of the best 12 teams in the country right now. And Ole Miss could possibly be doing that if they put a good resume of work together in the final 3 games of their season.
Yeah, and if I think Miami, if they lose one game in this regular season, they might get booted by the committee, just because they haven't played anyone. And they have, I mean, the thing about Miami, and I know we talked about them already, but they're square in the thick of this thing right now, and they're set up to maybe even get a bye. But as soon as they play a team with a competent defense, they're going to get blown out ugly. I mean, if they play Georgia right now, that could be a replay of last year Georgia against Florida State. And maybe not that bad, because I do think Miami has a really good offense. But if their offense isn't scoring 40+ points a game, they're going to lose, because their defense is giving up 45 to Louisville, 38 to Cal, 34 to Virginia Tech. And then those are the only competent teams they've played, other than, I guess, the Florida game, but that was the first game of the year. That was a long, long time ago. And so I do not see it with this Miami team. They're undefeated. You are what your record is. But their schedule, they have the worst schedule in college football. Have you seen the rest of their schedule? It's
for Miami.
Yeah. It's at Georgia Tech, home against Wake Forest, at Syracuse. They didn't play. They didn't play Clemson. They didn't play. I mean, in the Florida State's obviously off the cliff. Yeah, SMU, Pitt, any of these teams, and so the ACC is going to cause some serious issues in the final playoff, because you're going to have the committee have to decide whether to put a 2-loss SEC or Big Ten team in, or a 1-loss ACC team who didn't play anyone.
Jake, is it possible that they kind of get the Florida State treatment? And I know it's a 12-team playoff, but and I know Florida State finished this season undefeated, but say they look not great enough, but they go in to the ACC championship, say playing at Clemson, and they lose to Clemson in humiliating fashion. Clemson just has their way with them. They don't look like they belong in the playoffs. With 1 loss in a conference championship game, could you see a Miami getting booted, and say an SMU maybe with 1 loss, or a Pitt with 1 loss jump them in the standings? Or would it just be Clemson's the only representative from the ACC?
I think there'll be more than one ACC representative. I think, because of what we talked about earlier in this week with kind of the battle between the conferences, and the ACC and the Big 12 are kind of, it's them against the SEC and the Big 10. And the committee has people from all the conferences. And I don't think anyone actually wants this thing to just split up into 2 completely different football leagues, which is a possibility in all of this. And I don't think that's going to happen. And part of that not happening is going to be, they're going to choose a 1-loss SEC team or a ACC team to get in. If there's only one other ACC team in, I guarantee there'll be at least 2 ACC teams, if not 3. But the question is whether or not, if a 1-loss SMU is sitting in there, didn't get in the conference championship, or a 1-loss Pitt is sitting there and didn't get in the conference championship, would they leapfrog Miami and Miami get left out? Just considering Miami didn't play any of the top ACC teams, what would make this a lot easier is if they can drop one of these games down the stretch, which I think could happen. But at the same time, none of those 3 teams are good football teams that I think would have a legit shot to beat
their
them.
offense, their offense is too good to they'll be able to outscore the rest of their opponents. I think Duke having a better defense than the remaining schedule is the only reason why I had Duke beating Miami, is because I thought maybe they could hold their own and score enough points with the defense as good as Duke's to hold it. So, Jake, let's move on. Vanderbilt versus Auburn. That game is coming down. It was 13-7. Did they take away the field goal, or is my thing just so I guess Vanderbilt got the ball back. Something happened with a
second and goal at the Auburn 4 for Vanderbilt right now.
Okay, so it did pop up as a score alert as 13-7. Maybe there was a timeout called. I'm not watching the game currently live, but anyway, it is back down 10-7 with Vanderbilt in scoring position. But man, Diego Pavia, a game to forget. 8 of 21, 139 passing yards, 1 touchdown. He's got 12 rushing attempts for 26 yards, only 2 yards per carry there for Diego Pavia. That's probably the lack of production that we're seeing from Vanderbilt, as they just scored a touchdown, 16-7, as my box score updates, but it was a touchdown pass from Pavia to Eli Stowers. So, Jake, Vanderbilt looks like they are likely going to hold on and win outright against Auburn. Auburn was a 7-point favorite, which I thought was absurd and ridiculous in the first place. But Vanderbilt with another SEC win.
Well, and a nice win.
It's not over. It's not over yet.
It's over. Auburn finds a way. Auburn is the weirdest team in college football this year because they have a pretty good defense. I mean, their defense has been pretty good all year. And when you look at their box scores, they almost always outgain or are very close in yardage. Even the Georgia game, which is the only game they've really got blown out this year, all their other losses are one possession. Lost by 1 possession to Missouri. They lost by 1 possession to Oklahoma. They did lose by 10 to Arkansas, and then they lost by 7 to Cal. All their games it reminds me of some of those like Sarkisian's first year at Texas, where they lost 7 games, but every loss other than the Arkansas game was a 1 possession loss. Mm-hmm. And so you're like, well, there's something there. They got to find a way to win the actual games. That's where Auburn's at this year. And it feels like next year is going to be really make or break for them because Auburn should never be a 1-win conference team. And especially when they may not be the most talented team this year, but their play on the field's better than their record, and that's a coaching issue, in my opinion. And so that puts that coach on puts Hugh Freeze on a short leash. But I think it's a good win for Vanderbilt, the standpoint of they've now won in multiple different ways. This is a game where their defense led the way. It is a road win, which is something they've struggled to come by, and I think the main reason they were 7-point underdogs in this game. And it's bowl eligibility for Vanderbilt. When's the last time Vanderbilt was in a bowl game? I'll try to find this while you give your thoughts, but it's been a long time.
No, yeah, and I've been impressed by Vanderbilt. And again, they still need to hold on to win. They have a 10-point lead with 4 minutes to go. So if by the time we're done recording this, they end up winning the game, don't listen to anything that we're saying currently. But no, Jake, I think it's a solid season for Vanderbilt, and it's really fun to see them have the season that they're having under Clark Lee. And with Diego Pavia, hopefully they can kind of keep it going, whether that be through recruiting or transfer portals, or just they're getting, the right guys in the right system for this thing to work out for them long term. And so, yeah, it's fun to see them play this style of football, whether that be, slow, methodical, mistake-free football to get them some wins. And like you said, they're going to go bowling. And I think I want to say it was probably 2018.
They lost to Baylor in the Texas Bowl 45-30-18 or 30-18, 45-38. Then 2016, 2014, 2012, 2011. So it's been that's a long time. That's been about 6 years since they made a bowl game. And then if you just look in the past 10 years, they've been to 3 bowl games. And it's been since 2014 that they've won a bowl game. So Vanderbilt's a team that I think still has a lot to play for. They seem like a prideful team this year. They're well coached. They want to just win football games. They kind of know that where Vanderbilt's been, and that just making a bowl game, winning a bowl game would be really big for them. And so it's nice to see. And if they can keep that coach and they can hit the transfer portal and they can get some recruits in, they're a team that I think could go from being a bottom dweller in the SEC to a middle of the pack team that's going to upset some teams every year.
All right, Jake, we've got some action going on in the second slate of games. The second window is underway, and Oregon inside the Michigan 5-yard line right now, about to score on their opening possession. You got Texas Tech leading Iowa State 7-0 after about their first drive down the field. It ends in a touchdown over undefeated Iowa State. Michigan State leading over Indiana 3-0 early in the first quarter, and they also have the ball and driving on Indiana's side of the field. This is the first time Indiana has been trailing this season, FYI, for anybody keeping up with that. So are we in store for any type of upsets? And what's it like, Jake, for these programs like in Indiana, like in Iowa State, to get to the month of November? They haven't had a loss on their schedule yet. They're in uncharted territory. Does the mind game and the fatigue of the regular season start playing an effect on these guys?
Yeah, and it's also just the fact you're going to play your harder football games as the year goes on, and I think we're going to see an upset or two today at least. The question is where at. I don't think it's going to happen for Michigan, who's just not going to be able to score enough points, even if their defense does well. Iowa State definitely could be on an upset watch. And then I kind of look across the country. Obviously, the South Carolina Texas A&M game looms large tonight. I think we're going to see someone fall between this A&M game, Clemson game, and this Iowa State game. That there's going to be 1 to 2 upsets between those 3 games is what I think. And kind of on the point of an Iowa State being undefeated, this kind of being uncharted territory for them. This is where you find out whether or not they're legit or not, is whether they can win some of these games down the stretch. Because really, if you look at their schedule, if they get past Tech, they should win out until the last game of the year, where they'll have a showdown against Kansas State, and that'd be a fun one to watch. But
that'll be a lot of fun.
You feel like this Tech game is the game that's going to kind of decide whether or not they end up in the Big 12 championship this year, or if they drop this and then they maybe lose one more and they fall out of the Big 12 title game, which the Big 12, by the way, we haven't dove too deep into them, but that is also a cluster. And I think it's probably a better conference than the ACC this year. I think there's a lot more competent football being played in the Big 12 than in the ACC.
I think the top of their teams might fall a little short of, say a Clemson, maybe even a Miami. That's debatable in my opinion. But then you really get into where SMU and Pitt are as a program, and then you're comparing those guys to a BYU and Iowa State and K-State. And I think K-State is going to be a dark horse to win that conference, Jake. I wouldn't be surprised whatsoever if they end up having a first-round bye in the playoffs over BYU, over an Iowa State. They're playing their best football right now. They're a program that kind of has a little bit more prestige than the other ones, and I wouldn't be surprised if we saw K-State kind of end up winning that conference in the Big 12. But like you said, Jake, I think top to bottom, I think the Big 12 is a more competent program, or a more competent conference than the programs within the ACC, because then you've also got a Colorado in there who's also playing very well. They're on a bye week this week. But Jake, let's go ahead and touch on some of the other games you got right now getting underway. Florida, Georgia, and then later on tonight, obviously, South Carolina, A&M. It looks like it's going to be Marcel Reed getting the starting nod. And then you've also got Florida, Georgia. I don't see any way on this planet where Florida beats Georgia, but it is a rivalry, and that's kind of what those games are all about.
Yeah, by the way, I have been eyeing over at this Florida Georgia game. I turned on the audio a little bit. Yeah, get out of here. That's nothing like Texas OU. That's it's not even it's not even on the same planet. But maybe Florida will be able to make it close, but it's just really, really hard to imagine them actually being able to beat Georgia when Georgia's just now been starting to play their best football. And the thing about Georgia is, for them right now, the rest of the season, it feels like the goal is more just to get their offense going, because it feels like the defense, as long as they stay healthy, which is a key, because that's why their defense was struggling for a little bit there in the early to middle part of the season, was they were missing a lot of key guys. But their defense has been absolutely rolling since. And I just don't see Florida being able to move the ball on them, yet alone score. You're going to need 20 to 30 points at minimum to win this type of game. And I don't think Florida will touch 20 points this game.
Yeah, it'll be interesting, Jake. I'm looking forward to seeing if Michigan State can hold on. They're in Indiana's red zone currently. It's 3rd and 11 at Indiana's 18-yard line. They might settle for another field goal. It'll be interesting if teams like Iowa State, they ended up with a field goal.
Michigan State.
Michigan State just got a touchdown. So it'll be very interesting to see these teams that are on the outside looking in that really can't afford a blemish. Now, you and I, we've talked about, yeah, of course, if you're Ole Miss, if you're Tennessee, you can have a loss or two and still get it if you're Georgia. Indiana, Iowa State, BYU are not those programs. So those rules may not apply to a team unless you win your conference, which it may not be possible if with a one loss with some of those programs.
It applies to Indiana because if they lost this game and won out, they would beat Michigan, Ohio State, and then Purdue, who's not good. But with wins over Michigan, Ohio State, Washington, the domination that they did over Nebraska, and Indiana could get in. But the thing for Indiana is if you lose this game as a fan, you're going to feel like you're done, because you're not going to expect to go to Ohio State and win that game. Though I'm not a big believer in Ohio State right now. We can jump into that next week, but I don't think they're a threat to win the national title like I thought they would be.
A lot of things yet to shake up, everybody, and that is going to do it for our Week 10 reaction and kind of looking ahead a little bit as well. Again, Texas is on a bye week, so this is a nice week to just sit back, relax, watch some games unfold. I think we're going to get a lot of answers as we do each and every single week, and then we're going to get some answers, but we're even going to get even more questions as we move forward into Week 11 as Texas will prepare for the Florida Gators. Sark and the coaching staff are sitting down and watching this Georgia game right now. So, Jake, any last sentiments, any last words?
No, just ready to, now that we've had the week off and now it's Saturday and I'm watching football, I'm like, okay, I'm going to be very, very hungry for Texas football come next Saturday. Needed the bye. Without a doubt, the team needed it. I needed it. I think you needed it. I think the whole fan base needed it. But I'm ready to see them go out and play Florida next week at home and get this final stretch of the season going and not even right the ship, because they just won a ranked game on the road. But just go out and start to show what a good football team they are down the stretch.
Exactly. All right. Well, again, we come out with these episodes Tuesday through Friday at noon. At 12, we let the football dictate our schedule, and Jake and I will come out with an immediate reaction following that Florida game as well. For everybody, happy college football watching as we head into November. It is the longest stretch of college football any of your teams will ever experience, especially if you've got a chance going in and playing some postseason football as well. So with that being said, thanks for listening. This is your daily fix for all things Texas Longhorns right here on All In Horns, brought to you by Rogue Sports Network. I'm Tanner Carlson. He's Jake Jimerson. Hook 'em.
All In Sports Network. We love sports.